You've got the bag of grass seed in your hand right now, and sitting right next to it is a bag of topsoil, already open, ready to spread over the seed the second it goes down. Maybe you've been staring at this lawn for weeks, more dandelion and clover than actual grass, and you finally made the call this weekend to fix it properly, once and for all, instead of putting it off another season. Stop for 10 seconds before you touch either one. There's a real chance that the topsoil sitting next to that seed is the exact reason this reseed fails in 3 weeks. And it has nothing to do with the seed itself, nothing to do with how much you water it, and nothing to do with your soil being cursed. It's what's hiding inside that bag of dirt you are about to spread on top of your seed. Before we get to that, you need to understand something that changes how you look at this whole lawn. Weeds are not the disease. Weeds are the symptom. Think about how a weed actually gets into a lawn in the first place. A seed lands on the ground, and for it to grow, it needs light hitting bare soil. In a thick, healthy stand of grass, that seed lands on a dense mat of blades, never reaches the dirt, never gets light, and just sits there and dies. Weeds don't invade healthy turf. They colonize gaps. So when you're looking at a lawn that's mostly weeds, what you're actually looking at is a lawn where the grass thinned out first, and the weeds moved into the empty space afterward. The weeds didn't win a fight against your grass. They moved into a house your grass had already left, standing empty. That matters because it means killing the weeds by itself accomplishes almost nothing. Spray everything dead and don't fix the thinness, and you're left with bare soil, which is the single most weed-friendly surface on Earth. One season later, you're right back where you started, except now you've also paid for herbicide on top of it. The real fix is getting grass thick enough to close those gaps, and that means seed is the answer, but only in the right order. Get that order wrong, and you can do everything else correctly and still end up standing in the same weedy yard, $60 lighter, wondering whether something is wrong with your soil, your water, or the particular piece of ground you happen to own. The first thing that quietly wrecks a reseed job is a clock you didn't know was running. Go check your garage right now for anything labeled crabgrass preventer or anything that says weed and feed on the front. Both of those almost always contain a pre-emergent herbicide, and here's exactly what that does. It lays down an invisible barrier just under the surface of your soil, and that barrier attacks the very first root a seed puts out the moment it germinates, before anything ever breaks the surface. It cannot tell the difference between a weed seed and a grass seed. It kills both. And that barrier stays active in your soil for roughly 12 weeks after you put it down. Though some of the stronger, longer-lasting products can hold on for 4, 5, even 6 months, especially in cooler weather, so don't assume every product resets on the same schedule. So picture how this plays out. In spring, you do the responsible thing and put down crabgrass preventer. 2 months later, you decide the lawn needs thickening, so you spread grass seed over it. Nothing comes up, not a single blade. You assume the seed was junk or your soil is somehow beyond saving, but the seed was fine. It germinated. It put out its first root. That root hit the chemical barrier you laid down weeks earlier, and it died underground before it ever had a chance to show you it was alive. You paid for weed prevention, and it worked exactly as advertised. It just also worked on the one thing you actually wanted to grow. Before you do anything else, go read the bags in your garage. If a pre-emergent went down in the last several months, your seeding date isn't set by your calendar. It's set by that clock, and setting it by your calendar instead is exactly how good, careful people end up standing in the same weedy yard wondering what they did wrong. There is one useful exception worth knowing here, because it actually solves this timing problem instead of just working around it. The active ingredient mesotrione, sold under names including tenacity, is a pre-emergent that works alongside grass seed rather than against it. It prevents crabgrass and clover from coming up while still allowing grass seed to germinate normally, and you apply it at the time of seeding rather than months before. It works well with cool season grasses like fescue, Kentucky bluegrass, and perennial ryegrass, but it can injure some warm season grasses. So if you're growing St. August, Saint, or centipede in a southern climate, read the label carefully or check with your local extension office before reaching for it. For a lot of people in the rest of the country, that one product removes the timing squeeze entirely, letting you prevent weeds and seed in the same season instead of choosing one or the other. Even once that clock is cleared, there's a second one, shorter, but just as easy to miss, and it catches people who already knew about the first. Post-emergent herbicide is what you spray on weeds that are already up and growing, the selective broadleaf killers that take out dandelions and clover without hurting your grass. These are genuinely useful and often the correct first step on a weedy lawn, but they linger too. As a general rule, you want somewhere in the range of 4 to 6 weeks between applying a post-emergent and putting seed down, and the exact number is on the label of the specific bottle in your hand, not a general guide you read somewhere. Here's the squeeze this creates. The best window for reseeding most lawns is late summer into early fall, while the soil is still warm and the brutal heat has broken. Spray too late in the season, and by the time your waiting period clears, you've missed that window entirely and you're sitting out a whole year. The timing isn't a small detail here, it's the entire game. Now, once both of those clocks are clear, you're finally ready to seed those bare and thin patches. And this is exactly where the title of this video comes in, because there's one more mistake waiting, and it happens in good faith right at the finish line after you've already done everything else correctly. When you seed a bare patch, the standard move is to spread a thin layer of topsoil over the seed. It keeps the seed in contact with the ground, holds moisture, stops birds from picking it clean. Completely sensible. You grab a bag of topsoil from the garden center, spread it, and you're done. Except that bag of topsoil is very often loaded with weed seed. Read that again, because it explains an enormous amount of frustration people blame entirely on themselves. You fought weeds all spring. You finally reseeded, and 6 weeks later, that exact patch is full of new weeds, including some you've never seen in your yard before. You didn't fail. You planted them. They came in with the topsoil. Commercial topsoil is bulk material gathered from various sources, and it isn't sterilized, which means it carries whatever seeds were living in that ground when it was collected, and weed seeds can survive in soil for years, sometimes decades. When you spread that topsoil over your seedbed and water it every morning, you've built the single most weed-friendly growing environment on Earth. Warm, moist, loose, open to full light, you made a nursery. You just didn't choose what gets planted in it. The fix costs about $2. Skip the topsoil entirely and use sterilized peat moss or coconut coir instead, the same material used for starting seeds indoors. It's been heat treated, so nothing living remains in it. No weed seed, no fungal spores, just clean material that holds moisture around your grass seed without bringing anything else along with it. A small bag covers plenty of ground for spot repair work, and it sits on the shelf at every garden center you've ever walked into, usually a few feet from the topsoil most people grab without a second thought. It's worth being fair here too. Not every bag of topsoil is a disaster, and clean, reputable bag topsoil from a good source can be fine. It's the cheap, recycled bulk material that causes most of the trouble, but since there's no easy way to tell which bag you're holding just by looking at it, skipping topsoil for the seeded area entirely is the simplest way to remove that risk completely. I didn't want to just tell you that and move on, because every single one of these reseeding videos makes the same claim without ever showing you the actual difference. So I marked out 2 identical patches side by side in the same weedy strip, same seed lot, same date, same sun, same watering schedule. One patch got top dressed with ordinary bagged topsoil from the garden center. The other got top dressed with sterilized peat moss. On day 1, they look completely identical. Same bare dirt, same scattered seed, same light dusting on top. If you'd walked past both patches that first afternoon, you couldn't have told me which one was going to be the problem. By day 7, both patches showed the first thin green fuzz of grass coming up, right on schedule, and there was still nothing to distinguish them. That's actually the most important thing to understand about this whole trap. The failure doesn't show up early enough to warn you. It shows up exactly when you've already relaxed and started to believe the reseed worked. I'll admit that by day 7, I was starting to wonder if the whole $2 claim was overblown, since both patches looked equally clean at that point. By day 14, the topsoil patch started showing something extra. Small, broad-leafed seedlings scattered between the grass blades. Nothing dramatic yet. Easy to mistake for grass if you weren't looking closely, but clearly not the seed you'd planted. The peat moss patch had grass and only grass. Same watering both patches, same sun, same everything else. The only variable that had changed was what covered the seed. This is exactly the point where most homeowners either don't notice yet or notice and assume it's just a random weed that blew in on the wind, unrelated to anything they did. By day 21, the difference was impossible to miss. The topsoil patch had a noticeable scatter of small broadleaf weeds mixed in with the new grass, exactly the kind of unfamiliar plants people describe finding in their reseeded patches. The peat moss patch was clean grass, blade to blade, nothing else coming up through it. I want to be honest about what this test does and doesn't prove. It doesn't prove that every single bag of topsoil is contaminated, and it doesn't prove the weeds in that patch will overwhelm the new grass long term. Some of what came up may get shaded out once the grass fills in and gets its first few mowings. Not every bag of topsoil is guaranteed to carry weed seed either, since bag product from a reputable source can be cleaner than the cheap bulk stuff. And I can't promise your specific bag will behave exactly like mine did, but the test does prove the core claim behind this whole video. The topsoil introduced something the peat moss simply didn't on the same date, in the same conditions, from the same bag of seed. That's not a guess anymore. That's a side-by-side comparison you can go run in your own yard for about $2, and it's the difference between reseeding that thickens your lawn and reseeding that quietly plants a fresh batch of weeds into the exact spots you just cleared. There's still one more thing that can undo all of this, and you can't see it just by looking at the surface. It's already under your feet. Grass seed needs direct contact with soil to germinate. It cannot sprout sitting on top of a thatch layer or hard compacted ground. It has to work its way down and touch actual dirt, and overseeding without loosening compacted soil first dramatically reduces germination rates. Not slightly, dramatically. Most lawns that have gone weedy are compacted from years of foot traffic, mowing, and neglect, and compaction is invisible from above, which is exactly why so many people skip checking for it. The test costs nothing and takes 30 seconds. Push a long screwdriver straight down into the soil by hand, no hammer needed. In decent ground, it slides in several inches without much effort. If it stops dead after an inch or two, you're compacted, and seed spread on that surface is mostly feeding the birds. If you're compacted, core aeration is the answer, the kind that pulls actual plugs of soil out of the ground, not the spiked shoes that just push the compaction sideways without removing anything. And there's a bonus here worth knowing. Aerating right before you overseed leaves the ground dotted with thousands of tiny holes, and each one becomes a perfect little seed pocket, protected on three sides, in contact with soil, shaded from the sun that dries the surface fastest. Aerating and overseeding on the same day is one of the highest return combinations in all of lawn care, because you're not just opening the ground, you're building thousands of tiny covered seed pockets at the same time. There are three specific situations where you have to hold off on seeding entirely and deal with the weeds first, because seeding into them simply won't work, no matter how well you've handled everything else. The first is heavy creeping weeds, ground ivy, sometimes called creeping Charlie, along with nutsedge and bindweed. These don't just compete with new seedlings for space. They physically smother them, forming a mat that grows right over the top of anything trying to come up, and seeding into that mat is essentially throwing money on the ground. The second is a thick mat of dead crabgrass. Crabgrass is an annual, so cold weather kills it on its own, which sounds like good news, and partly it is, but if it's grown into a heavy mat, that dead thatch physically blocks seed from reaching soil, so it has to be raked out or the area scalped low first before you seed. The third is a serious broadleaf infestation. If more than about half your lawn is dandelions, plantain, or clover, it's worth treating that first and planning to seed a few weeks later rather than trying to thread the needle and fight a weed battle and nurture fragile new seedlings at the same time. Outside those three cases, you can usually just overseed and let the new grass do the work, especially heading into fall, since annual weeds are dying off anyway, and your new grass gets a head start before they can restart from seed next spring. Once the timing, the top dressing, and the ground are all sorted, the seed itself becomes the next place people quietly lose money. Match your seed to your climate first, since this is one of the most common places people lose money without ever realizing it. Cool season grasses, fescues, Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass do well in northern climates and grow most actively in spring and fall. Warm season grasses like Bermuda, zoysia, and St. Augustine are built for southern heat and grow hardest in summer. Putting the wrong category down means fighting your climate every season, and you will lose that fight no matter how carefully you follow every other step in this video. Second, read the label for weed seed content and filler. Cheap seed blends frequently contain a percentage of weed seed and crop seed, and a lot of them are loaded with annual ryegrass, which comes up beautifully fast and then dies completely, which is exactly why the lawn looks great for 6 weeks and then goes thin again, and you blame your soil or your watering when the problem was in the bag the day you bought it. A good bag will list its contents clearly, and the weed seed percentage will be very low. It's also worth matching the seed to the grass you already have where possible, since overseeding a different species into an existing lawn will still grow, but it can leave you with 2 visibly different patches side by side because the blade texture and color don't match. Check the date on the bag too. Grass seed loses viability as it ages, and a bag that spent a hot summer and a cold winter sitting in a shed can germinate at a fraction of what the label claims. Buy fresh, close to when you'll use it, and store what's left somewhere cool and dry rather than in a hot garage. Nobody thinks of seed as something that goes bad, but it absolutely does. Now here's the part that costs absolutely nothing, and it might be the highest value tip in this entire video. Raise your mower deck a notch or two. That's it. That's the whole tip. Remember the core principle from earlier that weed seeds need light hitting bare soil to germinate. Cut your grass short and you open the canopy, letting sunlight reach the ground between the blades, rolling out a welcome mat for every weed seed in your yard. Cut it taller, and the grass shades its own soil, and those seeds never get the light they need. Taller grass also grows deeper roots, which makes it more drought tolerant, which keeps it thicker through summer stress, which closes more gaps. It compounds season after season, quietly and steadily. Most people mow short because it looks tidy and means mowing less often, and without ever meaning to, they've quietly been cultivating weeds for years without ever realizing it. Once your seed is actually down, your watering has to completely change from your normal everyday routine, because more new seed dies from bad watering than from almost anything else. And this is a mistake that trips up people who otherwise know exactly what they're doing. A mature lawn wants deep, infrequent watering, which is what drives roots downward. But a seed has no roots yet. It's sitting in the top half-inch of soil, and if that half-inch dries out even once after germination has started, that seedling dies, and there's no recovering it. So while you're waiting for germination, water lightly and frequently enough to keep the surface consistently damp several times a day in hot weather, never soaking it. You're not watering the soil profile. You're keeping the top layer from drying out. Once the new grass is up and you've mowed it a couple of times, you transition to deep and infrequent watering and stay there. That transition is what pushes the roots down and turns the new grass into something durable, instead of a shallow carpet that browns in the first hot week. And keep foot traffic off the seeded area entirely during this stretch. New seedlings are fragile, and walking across a germinating patch will kill a surprising amount of it. So if you've got kids or a dog that likes to cut across that corner of the yard, block it off for the next few weeks rather than hoping everyone remembers on their own. So here's the actual order of operations, start to finish, so you can just follow it without second-guessing each step. Take inventory of what's gone on your lawn in the last several months, because any pre-emergent sets your seeding date, not your calendar. Identify what you're actually fighting, since broadleaf weeds, grassy weeds, and creeping weeds all need different handling and different timelines. If you're in one of the 3 hold-off cases, treat now and mark your calendar weeks out, checking the specific label for its seeding interval. Prep the ground, core aerating if the screwdriver test says you're compacted, and raking out any dead mat so seed can reach soil. Choose seed that matches your climate and your existing grass, and check the label for weed content and freshness. Seed in the right window, which for most lawns is late summer into early fall, while the soil is still warm and weed pressure is dropping. Top dress with sterilized peat moss or coir, never topsoil. That's the $2 step, and it's the one almost everybody skips. Water light and frequent until germination, then switch to deep and infrequent, and stay off the new grass while it establishes. Raise your mower and keep it raised. And plan to do this again next fall, because a lawn that's gone mostly weeds usually doesn't come all the way back in one season. 1 round improves it. 2 rounds across 2 falls transforms it. Expecting a total turnaround in 6 weeks is exactly how people give up right before it starts working. So here's the verdict. Plain and simple. You almost certainly don't need to kill your whole lawn and start from bare dirt. That's expensive, it's brutal work, and it leaves you with the most weed-friendly surface there is. Most lawns that look like a lost cause are recoverable because the grass isn't gone. It's just been outnumbered and squeezed out of space. What you actually need is the right sequence and $2 of the right top dressing instead of the wrong one. Find out what's already been applied to your soil. Deal with the weeds that physically block seedlings. Loosen the ground. Seed and fall. Cover it with something sterile, not something that's quietly planting your next generation of weeds for you. Water it like a seed, not like a lawn, and raise that mower. Do that 2 years running, and the lawn that made you want to rent a tiller will be the thickest one on your street, and it'll stay that way. Because thick grass is the only weed control that never wears off, never needs reapplying, and doesn't cost you a thing once it's established. I want to be honest about the timeline here, too, because setting the wrong expectation is its own kind of failure. A lawn that's gone, mostly weeds, does not come all the way back in one season, and I'm not going to tell you it does. The seed bank sitting in your soil right now, built up over years, can carry viable weed seed for a decade or longer. What 2 seasons of doing this correctly builds is a lawn dense enough that those seeds land on a mat of living grass and never reach the light they need to sprout in the first place. That's not an overnight fix. It's a compounding one. And the people who give up after the first fall are almost always the ones who quit right before it started working. Tell me in the comments roughly what percentage of your lawn is weeds right now. 20%? Half? 80%? And tell me if you've reseeded before and it didn't take. I suspect a lot of you got caught by that pre-emergent trap and never even knew it. And I want to see exactly how common that really is across everyone watching this. I read every comment, and if enough of you name the same dominant weed, that's the next video I make.